They said respect could never be bought, but before the night was over, everyone in that restaurant would learn that dignity was the only currency that truly mattered. The crystal chandeliers above Bellissimo Reserve cast a warm golden glow over polished marble floors and tables dressed in crisp white linen, where laughter floated through the air as expensive watches flashed beneath tailored sleeves and champagne sparkled inside flawless glasses. Every seat had been reserved weeks in advance for the city's wealthiest families, and every employee knew tonight demanded perfection. Maya Brooks balanced a silver tray with practiced confidence, her steady hands reflecting years of experience despite the exhaustion hidden behind her calm smile. At 27, she had learned that invisible people survived longer. She greeted every guest with genuine kindness, ignored impatient remarks, and carried herself with quiet dignity that no uniform could conceal. Her dark curls were neatly tied back, her black apron perfectly pressed, and her eyes remained focused on the next table, never lingering on the luxury surrounding her. Across the dining room, Victoria Sterling entered like someone who believed the entire building had been constructed for her arrival. Her designer gown shimmered beneath the lights, and conversations paused just long enough for people to admire her confidence. Friends surrounded her with compliments, phones captured every smile, and the restaurant manager personally escorted her party toward the finest private table overlooking the skyline. Maya approached with fresh glasses of sparkling water, offering the same warm professionalism she showed every customer. As she carefully reached across the table, one unexpected movement from a guest caused a glass to tilt, sending a few drops of water onto the edge of Victoria's designer sleeve. It was barely noticeable, but silence spread across the room as Victoria slowly lowered her eyes toward the tiny droplets. Maya's heart skipped. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said immediately, reaching for a clean napkin. Victoria stepped back before Maya could help. Her expression hardened into something colder than disappointment. "Do you even know how much this dress costs?" she asked loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Conversations faded. Silverware stopped moving. Maya lowered her eyes with quiet respect. "It was an accident. I sincerely apologize." Victoria laughed, but there was no warmth behind it. "Of course it was. People like you always have an excuse." Several guests exchanged awkward glances while others smiled uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or simply enjoy the spectacle. The restaurant manager hurried over, offering repeated apologies to Victoria before turning toward Maya with visible frustration. "Stand here," he whispered sharply. "Don't make this worse." Maya obeyed without argument. Her fingers tightened around the folded napkin as she absorbed every stare surrounding her. She wanted to disappear, not because she believed she deserved humiliation, but because she refused to let anger define her. Victoria folded her arms with satisfaction. Maybe next time they'll hire someone who belongs in a place like this. A few nervous laughs echoed through the elegant dining room. Maya remained perfectly still, refusing to answer, refusing to surrender the quiet grace that had carried her through every difficult day of her life. Far across the restaurant, seated alone in the exclusive VIP corner, Adrian Castellano slowly placed his fork beside his untouched dinner. His icy blue eyes never left the young waitress standing alone beneath dozens of judging faces. He said nothing. He made no gesture. But every member of his security team noticed the subtle change in his expression because the most dangerous man in the room had just stopped eating. Maya Brooks had long ago discovered that pride did not pay rent, but dignity could keep a person standing when everything else tried to knock them down. Every weekday began at 5 o'clock in the morning inside a modest apartment in Brooklyn where the sound of an aging coffee maker replaced the luxury alarms that echoed through penthouses across Manhattan. She quietly prepared breakfast before leaving 2 sandwiches in the refrigerator, each carefully labeled for her younger brother, Jordan, a second-year engineering student whose scholarship covered tuition but little else. Their late mother had once told them that kindness was something nobody could steal unless you gave it away, and Maya carried those words with her every single day. By 6:30, she was riding the subway with construction workers, nurses, janitors, and countless people whose names the city would never remember, but whose work kept New York alive. She often reviewed restaurant menus during the ride, memorizing new wines and unfamiliar dishes because she believed excellence was a choice rather than a privilege. Bellissimo Reserve had hired her 18 months earlier after 3 difficult interviews, and despite the polished uniforms and elegant dining rooms, she never forgot that one mistake could cost everything she had worked for. Many of her co-workers admired her patience because she never answered cruelty with bitterness. She listened when new servers felt overwhelmed, quietly corrected small mistakes before managers noticed them, and covered extra shifts whenever someone faced a family emergency. Even the dishwasher, an older immigrant named Luis, often joked that Maya smiled enough for the entire kitchen. She always laughed softly and answered that someone had to. Earlier that afternoon, she had noticed a nervous young hostess struggling to memorize the seating chart for the evening's reservations. Instead of taking her own break, Maya spent 20 minutes helping the young woman practice table assignments until she finally smiled with confidence. No supervisor saw that small act of kindness. Maya never expected anyone to. Across the East River, Adrian Castellano had spent the same afternoon inside a glass conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Billion-dollar agreements rested neatly inside leather folders while executives debated percentages and expansion plans, but Adrian rarely spoke more than necessary. At 38, he had earned a reputation for making decisions with remarkable precision, and people often mistook his silence for indifference. They were almost always wrong. He noticed details others ignored, from the nervous tapping of an investor's finger to the exhausted expression on the face of the assistant serving coffee during meetings. Respect, in Adrian's mind, revealed more about a person's character than wealth ever could. His grandfather had raised him with one unbreakable rule. Watch how someone treats the person who cannot improve their life, because that is who they truly are. Those words had followed Adrian through every success, every negotiation, and every difficult decision. Now, as the elegant restaurant remained suspended in uncomfortable silence, he watched Maya standing alone beneath the weight of humiliation with the same quiet composure she had shown every guest throughout the evening. She could have argued. She could have defended herself. Instead, she protected the atmosphere of the restaurant even while no one protected her. Adrian slowly folded his linen napkin onto the table with deliberate care. Beside him, his longtime security chief, Daniel Mercer, recognized the familiar signal that always preceded an important decision, although neither of them had spoken a single word. The silence that settled across Bellissimo Reserve lasted only a few seconds before Victoria Sterling smiled again, and somehow that smile made the atmosphere even colder. She brushed the tiny drops of water from her sleeve with exaggerated care before looking directly at Maya, as though she were examining something unpleasant. "This is exactly why some people should never work in places like this," she said loudly, making certain every nearby table could hear. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but nobody challenged her words. The restaurant manager immediately stepped closer to Victoria with an apologetic expression. "Miss Sterling, we sincerely apologize. We will make this right." His attention then snapped toward Maya. "Stand still and let the customer speak." Maya quietly folded her hands in front of her apron. Her heartbeat pounded inside her chest, yet her voice remained gentle. "I truly am sorry for the accident." Victoria laughed again. "Sorry does not remove stains. Sorry does not buy another dress." One of her friends raised a phone as if recording the awkward moment, while another whispered something that caused a few nervous chuckles around the table. Maya noticed the young hostess she had helped earlier standing near the entrance with frightened eyes. The young woman looked ready to step forward, but Maya gave her the slightest shake of her head. She refused to let someone else lose a job because of her. The manager noticed the silent exchange and immediately pointed toward the hostess. "Emily, stay where you are. This does not concern you." Emily froze, relief and guilt mixing across her face. Victoria slowly circled Maya by a single step, studying her uniform with open contempt. "Tell me something. Did anyone ever teach you what first-class service means? Or do they simply hand out aprons and hope for the best?" Maya took a slow breath before answering. "My responsibility is to serve every guest with respect, ma'am." Victoria tilted her head. "Respect? Then perhaps you should show a little more of it." She picked up the clean linen napkin Maya had offered only moments earlier and casually let it fall onto the polished marble floor. "Pick it up." The request itself was ordinary, but the tone transformed it into something entirely different. Every nearby conversation stopped once again. Maya quietly bent down, retrieved the spotless napkin, and placed it back onto her tray without saying another word. Victoria folded her arms with satisfaction. There, that was not so difficult. The manager forced an uneasy smile toward the surrounding diners, as though hoping the uncomfortable moment would disappear. Instead, it only grew heavier. Maya noticed Luis watching from the kitchen entrance with obvious concern, but he remained where he was, knowing that any interruption would likely cost him his position as well. Maya offered one final apology. "I hope the rest of your evening is enjoyable." She began to turn toward the service station, hoping the humiliation had finally ended. "I did not dismiss you," Victoria replied sharply. Maya stopped immediately. For the first time that evening, even the musicians performing soft piano near the dining room entrance hesitated between notes. Across the restaurant, Adrian Castellano remained seated without a single change in expression, yet Daniel Mercer quietly received a brief message through his earpiece. After listening for only a moment, he leaned toward Adrian and whispered, "We have everything you asked for." Adrian kept his eyes on Maya as he answered in a calm voice that barely rose above a whisper. "Good. Now I know exactly who deserves to leave this restaurant with respect, and who does not." Adrian Castellano did not believe in making decisions while emotions were loud, because the truth usually revealed itself during silence. Daniel Mercer stood beside him with a discreet tablet displaying the first results that had arrived within minutes. Bellissimo Reserve was part of a luxury restaurant group owned by Sterling Hospitality Partners. Victoria Sterling was not merely a wealthy customer enjoying dinner. She was the founder's daughter and had grown accustomed to walking into every room as though consequences belonged to other people. Adrian listened without interrupting, his gaze never drifting from Maya, who remained standing with remarkable composure despite the uncomfortable attention surrounding her. Daniel lowered his voice even further. "Maya Brooks, 27 years old. No disciplinary record. Employees consistently rate her as the most dependable member of the service team. She has covered more than 100 extra shifts during the past year. Several customer reviews specifically mention her professionalism." Adrian nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "And the manager?" Daniel scrolled to another page. 3 formal complaints in the last 18 months involving disrespect toward staff. None investigated beyond internal review. Adrian's expression remained unreadable. "Interesting." Across the dining room, Maya noticed Emily struggling to hold back tears near the hostess stand. The young woman blamed herself for doing nothing, but Maya offered her another reassuring smile before quietly returning her attention to Victoria. Even now, she chose to comfort someone else instead of defending herself. That single gesture caught Adrian's attention more than any words could have. Most people revealed their character when life was easy. Maya revealed hers when kindness cost something. Victoria glanced around the dining room, enjoying the audience that had gathered without leaving their seats. "Why is everyone so quiet?" she asked with a playful laugh. "I thought fine dining came with entertainment." A few guests forced polite smiles, while others deliberately looked away. Nobody wanted to become part of the confrontation, yet nobody could pretend it was not happening. The pianist gently resumed playing, but even the soft melody could not dissolve the tension hanging over the room. The manager stepped beside Victoria once more. "Miss Sterling, please allow us to offer complimentary dessert and another table if that would improve your evening." Victoria waved the suggestion away. "I already have the best table. What I want is accountability." She looked directly at Maya again. "Employees should remember who pays their salary." Maya answered with the same calm voice that had never wavered. "Every guest deserves respect, and every employee should offer their best service. That is what I try to do every day." Victoria smiled with open disbelief. "You still think this is about service?" Maya did not answer. She simply stood with her shoulders straight and her eyes steady, refusing to surrender the last thing nobody could take from her. Adrian slowly reached for the glass of sparkling water resting untouched beside his dinner. He studied the reflections dancing beneath the chandelier before quietly placing the glass back on the table. "Daniel," he said softly, "there is a difference between power and privilege. One earns respect. The other merely expects it." Daniel understood immediately. He had worked beside Adrian long enough to recognize that quiet tone. It never announced anger. It announced certainty. Somewhere near the entrance, the revolving doors opened as another group of well-dressed guests entered the restaurant, unaware that they were walking into a moment people would remember long after the last table had been cleared. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket, rose calmly from his chair, and every member of his security detail stood at exactly the same moment without a single word being spoken. I and Bellissimo Reserve followed Adrian Castellano as he crossed the dining room with slow, deliberate steps that echoed softly across the polished marble floor. He was not rushing. He was not angry. His calmness carried far more weight than raised voices ever could. Conversations faded into complete silence as guests instinctively moved their chairs aside, creating a clear path without being asked. The musicians lowered their hands from the piano keys, and even the kitchen staff peeked through the service doors, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Victoria Sterling finally noticed the approaching man. At first, she offered the polished smile she reserved for influential people. She assumed he had come to support her position, as so many wealthy acquaintances had done throughout her life. "Good evening," she said confidently. "I am sure you can see how unacceptable this level of service has been." Adrian did not answer. Instead, he stopped beside Maya. For a brief moment, he studied the young waitress, standing with quiet dignity despite the embarrassment she had endured. Her shoulders remained straight. Her breathing remained steady. She had not insulted anyone. She had not blamed anyone. She had simply continued choosing respect. Adrian reached toward the tray she still carried and gently lifted the folded linen napkin from it before placing it carefully on the nearest table. Then, in a gesture nobody expected, he pulled out an empty dining chair beside him. "Miss Brooks," he said in a calm, measured voice, "please have a seat." Maya blinked in surprise. "Sir, I am working." Adrian gave a slight nod. "For the next few minutes, I would like you to sit down." The restaurant manager hurried forward, his face pale with concern. "Sir, employees are not permitted to sit with guests." Adrian finally turned toward him. His expression remained composed, yet the manager immediately fell silent. "I did not ask about your policy," Adrian replied quietly. "I asked Miss Brooks to sit." Maya hesitated, uncertain whether accepting would create even greater trouble for herself later. Adrian noticed the hesitation immediately. "You have shown respect to everyone in this room," he said. "Allow someone to show a little respect to you." Slowly, Maya lowered herself into the chair, her hands resting carefully in her lap as though she still could not believe she belonged there. The surrounding guests exchanged bewildered looks. Some quietly lowered their phones, suddenly ashamed that they had watched the humiliation without speaking. Emily covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. Louise smiled from the kitchen entrance with unmistakable relief. Victoria's confident expression began to crack. "Excuse me," she interrupted. "This entire situation began because of her mistake." Adrian finally looked directly at Victoria for the first time that evening. His gaze was steady, neither hostile nor emotional. "A small accident began this situation," he answered evenly. "Everything after that was a series of choices." Those words settled over the room with extraordinary weight. Nobody dared interrupt. Nobody dared laugh. Victoria searched the faces around her, expecting support that never came. The applause she had silently expected had vanished, replaced by thoughtful silence and lowered eyes. Adrian calmly adjusted the cuff of his jacket before speaking once more. "Now that everyone has had an opportunity to reveal who they are," he said, "it is time we discuss the consequences of those choices." Victoria Sterling let out a quiet laugh that sounded far less certain than it had only moments earlier. She folded her arms and looked directly at Adrian with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life believing influence could solve every problem. "I appreciate your concern," she said smoothly, "but I believe this has become unnecessarily dramatic. My family has been supporting businesses like this for years." Adrian listened without interrupting. His expression remained composed, almost thoughtful, as though every word simply confirmed something he had already suspected. Daniel Mercer stepped forward and quietly handed Adrian a slim leather folder. Adrian opened it without hurry, glanced at a single page, and then looked toward the restaurant manager. "How long have you managed this location?" The question caught the manager completely off guard. Almost 4 years, sir. Adrian nodded. During those 4 years, how many complaints have been filed regarding the treatment of your employees? The manager swallowed hard. I do not have those numbers available. Adrian closed the folder. I do. The room remained silent. 3 formal complaints. 7 resignations that specifically mentioned a hostile work environment. Multiple customer reviews praising this young woman for professionalism despite management failures. The manager stared at the floor, unable to respond. Adrian turned his attention back to Maya. Miss Brooks, earlier this evening you protected a new employee from becoming involved. What? Maya hesitated before answering honestly. She is just beginning her career. She should not lose her job because of something that happened to me. Adrian studied her for another quiet moment. Even after being treated unfairly, you were still thinking about someone else. Maya offered a small smile. Everyone deserves a chance to do their best. Around the dining room, guests exchanged thoughtful glances. The atmosphere had completely changed. Only minutes earlier, many of them had remained silent out of convenience. Now they found themselves quietly admiring the woman they had barely noticed before. Victoria shifted impatiently. This is becoming ridiculous. She is a waitress. She made a mistake. We should move on. Adrian looked at her calmly. I agree. We should move on. But before we do, let us be certain we understand what actually happened. He slowly turned toward the surrounding guests. Did anyone here witness intentional disrespect from Miss Brooks? One by one, people gently shook their heads. An elderly couple spoke first. No, sir. She apologized immediately. A businessman at the neighboring table added. She remained professional the entire time. Another guest quietly admitted. The humiliation continued long after the accident was over. Victoria's confident posture began to weaken as the voices around her formed a clear picture that no amount of wealth could rewrite. Adrian allowed the silence to settle before speaking again. Accidents happen in every restaurant. Character reveals itself in how we respond afterward. He glanced toward Daniel, who gave the slightest nod. Everything had been verified. Every detail had been confirmed. Adrian slipped the folder closed and placed it gently on the table beside Victoria. Miss Sterling, he said in the same calm voice that had never risen above conversation level. Before this evening ends, there is something about this restaurant that you should know, and I believe the truth will surprise everyone in this room. Victoria looked down at the leather folder resting beside her hand before pushing it away with a faint smile. If this is supposed to impress me, it will not, she said. My father sits on the board of Sterling Hospitality. We know exactly how this business works. Adrian remained perfectly composed. That is precisely why this conversation matters. He opened the folder and removed a single document, placing it on the white linen tablecloth where everyone nearby could see the company letterhead. 3 weeks ago, Sterling Hospitality accepted a strategic investment agreement. Victoria frowned slightly. So, Adrian met her eyes. The majority investor listed on that agreement is Castellano Capital. For the first time that evening, Victoria's confidence disappeared completely. The restaurant manager looked at the document, then back at Adrian, his face draining of color. Several guests quietly exchanged surprised glances as whispers spread across the dining room. Castellano Capital was known throughout New York for acquiring luxury businesses and transforming them into nationally recognized brands. Adrian continued speaking with the same calm tone. The acquisition officially becomes effective at midnight. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the soft hum of the air conditioning above the elegant dining room. Victoria forced a laugh that sounded noticeably uncertain. You are saying you own this restaurant? Adrian answered with complete simplicity. By the end of tonight, I will. Daniel Mercer stepped beside him and quietly handed another document to the restaurant manager. Your employment is being reviewed immediately, Adrian said. Not because a customer complained, but because leadership without respect eventually destroys every business it touches. The manager lowered his head, unable to defend himself. Adrian then turned toward Maya. Miss Brooks. She immediately stood from the chair. Yes, sir. Please remain exactly where you are. She paused, confused but obedient. Adrian faced the dining room once again. Excellent restaurants are not built by expensive decorations or famous guests. They are built by people who arrive early, stay late, solve problems quietly, and continue treating others with dignity even when nobody is watching. His words settled over every table like a quiet truth that nobody could argue with. An older gentleman near the window slowly began applauding. His wife joined him. Within seconds, more guests followed until the elegant dining room filled with warm, respectful applause directed not toward wealth or influence, but toward the young waitress who had never asked for attention. Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. She instinctively looked around as though the applause belonged to someone else. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks without trying to hide them. Louise smiled proudly from the kitchen doorway. Victoria remained frozen in her chair, watching the room she had controlled only minutes earlier transform into a place where her voice no longer carried the greatest weight. Adrian waited patiently until the applause faded. Then he looked back at Maya with a quiet smile that carried genuine respect rather than sympathy. "Miss Brooks," he said, "this evening you demonstrated the kind of character that cannot be taught in any executive seminar or purchased with any amount of money. Tomorrow morning, if you are willing, I would like to discuss a new opportunity with you. I believe your future should be determined by your integrity, not by the opinion of someone who failed to recognize its value." The applause gradually faded, but the warmth it left behind lingered throughout the dining room like the final notes of a beautiful melody. Maya remained standing beside the table, still struggling to understand how a night that had begun with humiliation had transformed into something she never could have imagined. Adrian noticed the uncertainty in her eyes and spoke with the same calm sincerity that had defined every word he had spoken that evening. "Miss Brooks, have you had dinner tonight?" Maya blinked, almost embarrassed by the question. "No, sir. Employees usually eat after the dining room closes." Adrian gave a small nod before turning toward the head chef, who had quietly stepped out of the kitchen during the commotion. "Would you prepare the signature tasting menu?" The chef hesitated only long enough to ask, "For your table, sir?" Adrian looked back at Maya. "For our table." A quiet wave of surprise moved through the restaurant once again. Maya instinctively shook her head. "Sir, I cannot. I am still on duty." Adrian smiled gently. "You have been on duty all evening. For the next hour, you will be our guest." Emily covered her mouth with both hands, unable to hide her happiness. Luis quietly wiped his eyes with the corner of his kitchen towel before disappearing back through the service doors. The remaining staff exchanged proud smiles that required no words. The restaurant manager, now standing silently near the entrance, watched the moment unfold with the painful realization that genuine leadership created loyalty in ways authority never could. Adrian personally pulled out the chair across from him, not as an act of charity, but as a simple gesture of respect. Maya slowly took her seat, still unsure whether she truly belonged there. Crystal glasses reflected the golden chandelier above, while fresh bread, carefully prepared appetizers, and warm soup arrived one course at a time. Every server approached the table with the same dignity Maya had shown countless guests throughout her own career. She quietly thanked each of them by name, surprising Adrian. "You know everyone's name," he observed. Maya smiled softly. "People work harder when they feel remembered." Adrian considered those words for a moment. "That may be the best management advice I have heard in years." Their conversation remained simple. They spoke about family, long workdays, favorite books, and the importance of keeping promises even when nobody noticed. Maya mentioned her younger brother's dream of becoming an engineer and how every extra shift brought him one step closer to graduation. She never complained about sacrifice. She simply described it as part of loving someone. Adrian listened far more than he spoke, recognizing that true strength often arrived without demanding attention. Around them, many guests quietly resumed their dinners, yet more than one table occasionally glanced toward the pair with thoughtful expressions. Earlier they had witnessed someone being overlooked because of her position. Now they were watching that same person treated with the respect she had quietly earned all along. Victoria remained seated across the room, untouched dessert still resting before her. For the first time in years, she realized that influence could fill a reservation book, but it could never command genuine admiration. Adrian finally lifted his glass of sparkling water and looked toward Maya with quiet appreciation. "Thank you," he said. Maya looked surprised. "For what, sir?" He answered without hesitation. "For reminding an entire room that dignity does not become valuable when powerful people recognize it." It has always been valuable from the very beginning. 3 months passed, and the memory of that extraordinary evening never truly disappeared from Bellissimo Reserve. The restaurant itself felt different now. New leadership had introduced a simple principle that appeared on a discreet plaque near the employee entrance. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect. It was not a marketing slogan. It had become the standard by which every manager, server, chef, and executive was expected to live. Maya Brooks had accepted Adrian Castellano's invitation to join the company's leadership development program, but only after making one request of her own. She wanted to continue spending time with frontline employees before moving into any office. People cannot improve workplaces they no longer understand, she had explained. Adrian agreed immediately. Within weeks, Maya began helping design employee training focused not only on service, but also on kindness, communication, and mutual respect. Staff turnover quietly dropped. Customer satisfaction steadily increased. Employees who had once felt invisible now believed their voices mattered. Jordan completed another successful semester of engineering school, and for the first time in years Maya stopped worrying about whether she would have enough overtime hours to cover every bill waiting at home. One bright autumn afternoon, she stood inside the same dining room where everything had changed. The chandeliers still reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors, but the atmosphere felt lighter somehow. Emily, now a confident hostess, welcomed every guest with genuine warmth. Luis had recently been promoted to kitchen supervisor, and his smile had become one of the restaurant's most familiar sights. Adrian entered quietly without an announcement, just as he often preferred. He noticed something immediately. Maya was helping a new dishwasher learn where supplies belonged, laughing softly as though titles meant nothing compared to teamwork. She did not notice Adrian watching until he walked closer. "Good afternoon, Miss Brooks," he said. Maya smiled. "Good afternoon, sir." Adrian glanced around the busy restaurant before speaking. "You know, profitability has exceeded every projection." Maya laughed gently. "I have a feeling that has more to do with your investments than my advice." Adrian shook his head. "No. People stay where they feel respected. Customers return when they see that respect. You reminded me of that before anyone else did." Just then, the front doors opened once more. Victoria Sterling stepped inside wearing a simple business suit instead of an evening gown. She paused for a moment after recognizing Maya. The confidence that had once demanded attention had been replaced by quiet humility. She slowly approached the hostess stand before turning toward Maya. "I wanted to say something," she began carefully. "I was wrong that night. I judged someone without knowing anything about them. I have thought about it ever since." The dining room grew still, but this time there was no tension. Maya listened without anger. She simply smiled with the same quiet grace that had carried her through the hardest evening of her life. "Thank you," she replied. "I hope we both continue learning." There was no humiliation, no revenge, no triumph over another person. Only a moment of honest understanding that felt stronger than any public victory. Adrian watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction before turning toward the windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Some people believed power changed the world. Others believed wealth did. But on that unforgettable evening, a humble waitress had proven that dignity could transform hearts more completely than either of them ever could. And that day, everyone remembered what dignity truly looks like.